This week I was researching certain aspects of the story of David and Goliath. Because of the cultural cliche that this story has become, it had grown a bit thin to me, and I wanted a fuller understanding of the history and context. What I found was more than merely a simple story of the victorious underdog who prevails over the powerful warrior through luck and the providence of God. So imagine this. The armies of the Philistines and the Israelites are amassed on opposite ridges across the valley of Elah. They are at an impasse because to attack would mean descending into and across the valley only to make the suicidal climb up the other ridge. So the Philistines challenged the Israelites to what is known as single combat. This was a common practice in the ancient world in which both sides would seek to avoid the widespread bloodshed of full battle by choosing one warrior to represent each in a one-on-one battle. Now, as everyone knew at the time, the only winning strategy was to select your biggest and strongest warrior who excelled at close-range combat. The Philistines' choice, Goliath, seemed ideal. He was huge. Some estimates range from nearly 7 feet to over 9 feet tall, and he was a battle-tested champion. The Israelites looked upon this giant warrior, clad in full body armor and carrying 3 weapons specifically designed for close-range fighting, and they were paralyzed with fear and dismayed about what to do. Now entering the scene is that little cutie pie David, a young shepherd and experienced in battle. He approaches Saul, saying of Goliath, "Let no one's heart fail because of him." And he offers himself to fight. Well, Saul takes one look at him and says, "No way." But David tells Saul how he fought bears and lions to protect his sheep, and that the Lord delivered him then, and so too the Lord will deliver him now. And so David enters the valley entirely unprotected and without any weapons save for a sling tucked in his hand. But now that this sling, though, is no mere child's toy, is certainly not like the slingshot that you might have played with when you were young. A sling in the hands of an experienced slinger was a fiercely accurate and deadly weapon. It was a leather pouch attached in the middle by 2 lengths of rope. The slinger would put a rock or a lead ball in the pouch, grab both ends of the rope, swing it around in increasingly wider and faster circles, and then release one end, hurling the rock forward. For a slinger who knew what he was doing, a target could be killed or seriously injured accurately at a distance of up to 200 yards. And slingers were an essential part of the armies of the ancient world. While David was not an experienced warrior, he was an experienced slinger, this being the weapon of choice for shepherds fending off predators from their flocks. Now, Goliath was expecting a warrior more like himself to come forward to hand-to-hand combat, and he prepared accordingly. But what he got was a complete surprise. David was smart enough to know that he could not defeat the Philistine on his own terms, and so David fought with the skills he had and turned Goliath's strengths to his own advantage. Goliath expected close-range combat, but David changed the rules and attacked from a distance with artillery. As the saying goes, it seems that Goliath ended up bringing a knife to a gunfight. But it wasn't just pluck and cleverness that gave David victory over Goliath. As David proclaimed to him, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. It was David's faith that gave him the courage to face what was most assuredly the mightier Goliath. David's previous experiences of deliverance at the hand of the Lord in the face of dangerous predators formed a strong faith that God was with him, that when the cause was righteous, God would go before him into the danger. Now, David's faith did not provide some miraculous bubble of safety, removing all threat of harm to him. No, this situation was just as dangerous and the enemy just as deadly. Rather, it was that David's faith protected him from being imprisoned by fear. For he knew that he was not alone in facing this danger, that no matter what happened, God was with him. His experiences of God's presence working through him built and sustained a faith that gave him not only the courage to meet the frightening challenge before him, but also allowed him to be able to think clearly, assess the situation shrewdly, and change the rules of engagement to his advantage. I still imagine David was afraid. It would be foolish and inhuman not to be. But unlike Saul and his warriors who were consumed by fear and unable to act, David's faith in the living God delivered him from this fearful paralysis. It turns out that the tyranny of fear is the real enemy here, not Goliath. Fear can be a powerful and destructive force. Fear paralyzes, rendering us unable to make righteous choices and respond in love. Fear blinds us from possibilities and opportunities, limiting our vision to only what we know and have seen before. Fear causes us to forget, shutting us down so that we forget that God is with us and rely solely upon ourselves. Fear damages our relationships with others, hardening our hearts and sowing seeds of distrust. And fear makes us deaf to the cry of the poor and the disadvantaged, limiting our realm of concern to only our own needs and blinding us from the reality of our interdependence. All around, we see the terrible signs of the power of fear in our world. Fear is manipulated by us and wielded like a sword to oppress, silence, and gain power. Fear corrodes civil decency and discourse. Fear causes us to see only danger, scarcity, and competition, and blinds us to God's grace and abundance. And at its most extreme, fear stokes the fires of hatred and violence, objectifying and stripping the other of their humanity in order to soothe our own deep despair of inconsequence. If there is such a thing as evil personified, I believe it is embodied and lived out through the human actions driven by fear. The tyranny of fear is indeed our common enemy. Why are you afraid? Have you no faith? These are the words that Jesus says to his terrified disciples after he calmed the storm that violently battered their boat. It is faith that liberates us from the bondage of fear, faith that sustains us and guides us through our fear so that we may best face our challenges. Pay attention, though, to what Jesus did not say. He didn't say there is nothing to be afraid of. For the waves and the wind of the storm were indeed dangerous. Rather, he teaches that faith is the only lasting counterbalance to the tyranny of fear. And it is faith that helps us to remember that God is with us. To be sure, the world is full of dangers, and to never be afraid is to deny this lived reality. Pastor and writer Michael Lindvall writes this: The hard truth is that fearsome things are very real. Isolation, pain, meaninglessness, rejection, losing one's job, money problems, failure, illness, and death. As we grow in faith, we come to understand that even though such fearsome things are very real, they do not have the last word. They do not have ultimate power over us, because reigning over this world of fearsome things is a God who is mightier than they. Our mighty God does indeed reign over this world of fearsome things. But so often, we, like the panicked disciples, in the midst of the storm, let fear reign instead. We forget that we are not alone in the boat, for the living God is with us. The story of David's victory over Goliath is important because we all face challenges that seem enormous and hopeless. But following the faithful courage of David does not begin with stepping forward to face the dangerous giant. It begins well before that, with remembering the many ways that God has provided and protected us already. We too can be like David, sustained and delivered through the trust and the love of our mighty God in the midst of a world that is both fearsome and glorious, danger and grace-filled. Let us not be paralyzed by fear, but let our lived faith guide us. Let us recognize the strengths we have and use them to get to work, sowing not the seeds of fear, but the seeds of love. These are the seeds of the kingdom that bring about the transformation of the world from one of fear and violence to one of faith and grace. Amen.